Morning, everybody. Most of you know who I am, but if you don't, I'm Jen Greenwood, and I'm the current chair of the Conservation Committee of the NCBS. So I'm going to give my little plug for that first. The Conservation Committee, the goal basically is to facilitate and encourage conservation of wildlife habitat and ecosystems in general, and to facilitate a connection between people and those things. Right now our committee is about, I think it's 7 people. But we've identified lots of priorities and we have lots of ideas, so the more the merrier. At the back there's a sign-up sheet, and if you're interested in email us for the Conservation Committee, please put your name on it. So one of our committee members was aware of this proposal for a new park by the Valhalla Wilderness Society. So we contacted Craig Pettitt, and we're really happy that he's come to tell us about it. I think he's going to present for about an hour, and then there'll be time for questions afterwards, and then we're going to have a short conservation committee meeting where we talk about maybe how the NCS can support or be involved in this initiative. Very briefly about Craig. Craig is a charter member of the Valhalla Wilderness Society, and he says he's a jack of all trades and a master of none. But this proposal's been in the works for a really long time, and so he's been involved in that.
That's about it. Thanks, Jen.
Can we lower the lights?
Yeah, sure. Is that okay to lower the lights then?
Oh, lower them quite a bit.
Just, is that 50?
A little more. There,
Okay.
perfect.
Thanks.
So Jen was saying that we've been at this for quite a while. Well, in terms of protection, it hasn't been quite a while. Some of our campaigns, the Valhalla Park campaign took us 13 years. Our Spirit Bear on the coast took us over 20 years of work. So we're in it for the long term. In fact, 40 years ago, when we first started the project for Valhalla Park, we would have had nightmares knowing that we'd be gray-haired now and still doing this. Anyway, tonight I'm here to, let's see, is that going to work? I guess it isn't going to work. We're here to talk about the Selkirk Mountain Park proposal. And at the bottom we're saying we're going to protect the last remnants of inland temperate rainforest. Well, the Selkirk park proposal contains rainforest. But what is rainforest? Obviously it's a very wet area. The key determining fact is that the summer precip exceeds moisture loss, so that this forests never dry out. Previously, rainforest was always associated with coastal areas. Few people knew that we had actually scientifically definable rainforest in the interior of BC. But we do, and of course they're characterized very grossly or roughly by the cedar and hemlock trees that we find in the valley bottoms of the Kootenay-Columbia districts. Because these forests are so wet, they rarely burn. So they reach extremely large sizes and old age. This tree was measured at 3 1/4 meters in diameter. We cored it and we had about 24 centimeters of wood before we hit rot, and in that 24 centimeters it was 270 years. Using other calculations, we come to that this tree could possibly be 1,800 years old. So when we first started this project, we started to protect interior or inland rainforest. And we started searching through the interior wet belt to find areas of actual inland rainforest. We defined 3 key areas for protection. One up in the Robson Valley called the Walker Wilderness that we worked with the CSA, the Cedar League. There's an important area on the west side of the Caribou Mountains around the north end of Quesnel Lake. And then we found the Inkalmapoo. The first part of our work in looking for rainforest was to do a GIS project where we mapped the entire inland rainforest. This is just the southern half of it. That's the Big Bend of the Columbia, and of course the Canada-US border. And some of the inland rainforest goes down a little bit into northern Washington and northern Idaho. All the red and yellow on this map is all the clear cutting that has been done since 1960. So you can see wherever you can make out the parks, they're small islands of protection and they're not connected across the landscape very well. When we went in search of rainforest, we drove through many valleys, and this is what we found. That these valleys have been heavily clear cut. The forests that were left were in small fragments. And in each of these areas that we looked at, they all had special characteristics, but the forests of the Inkalmapoo stood out above any others. One, because way up in the Inkalmapoo, up in the center, up at Battlebrook, you're still only at 650 meters elevation. So that's very low elevation to have forests. Most of our valleys have been homesteaded at 600 meters elevation, so you don't see these forests. Secondly, the Inkalmapoo was contiguous to a protected area, where quite a few of the other forests that we looked at, some in the Robson Valley, were fragments that were surrounded by development, either logging development, highways, as well as reservoir development, whereas the Inkalmapoo is quite contiguous. Once you enter it, it's contiguous right to Glacier Park. So a lot of the scientists that we consulted say that the inland old cedar hemlock forest is some of the most endangered ecosystem in the world. These forests have been targeted by our forest industry because they've been, one, they claim they sit on very good growing sites that make for fast growth. These forests were considered decadent, so the idea was to knock them down, take the best wood, burn it, and get it replanted into more economically productive species. And species loss, the biggest thing with species loss is habitat destruction. So wherever, no matter what we do with species, if we destroy their habitat enough, we're going to start losing those species. And in terms of species loss, this is a situation with our mountain caribou. As you can see, in a 7-year period, the numbers aren't very good. The majority of them are declining. The Mountain Caribou Recovery Project, its goal in 7 years was to halt the decline of the population and stabilize these populations, while we're in year 7. And you can see our populations haven't been stabilized. Probably the only somewhat healthy herd may be the North Columbia. So in the Arrow Boundary Kootenai area, there's 186 red listed species in the cedar hemlock forests. And these are the forests that are the most heavily hit for logging in some of our rarest forests. So we're losing a lot of species. These cedar hemlock forests are important for mountain caribou. And in terms of our most endangered species, most of them are found on the valley bottom and the gentle slopes. But this is also where most of our logging has happened. And when we analyze our park systems or look at mountain caribou protection, our most protected areas are the steep mountainsides and mountaintops, the rock and ice, the areas that are economical to log. So let's throw them into caribou protection. And the minister says outright, 90% of the caribou winter range has been protected. Well, 90% of that winter range is the mountaintops. They're up in the subalpine and alpine meadows. So by protecting that mountaintop, they're really being very facetious. They've avoided protecting the majority of the economical loggable habitat for caribou in the valley bottoms. So when the BC Auditor General did an audit of the park system in 2010, he was shocked to find that there was no overall plan for our park system. That it was a series of isolated small parks. Most parks weren't large enough to inhabit a large wide range species like a male wolf. They were not connected across the landscape, and so he felt they had very little preservation value for biodiversity. So this is our park proposal. It looks a little like a jigsaw puzzle. Big hole in the center is largely high elevation glacier, rock, and ice, so we left it out of the proposal. Our proposal was geared towards trying to establish valley bottom connectivity. So we linked the Goat Range Provincial Park north-south to Glacier Park, as well as east-west to Bugaboo Park. We're trying to get low elevation forest and low elevation connectivity and start introducing this back into our park system. So the purple on this map is all the old forest that is still hasn't been logged. And this is one of the reasons we've targeted the low elevation, is to try to capture as much of old forest as possible. So on this map, the squiggly kind of red lines is the timber harvesting land base. So this kind of gives you an idea how steep and narrow these valleys are, that timber harvesting land base is just a small fragment along the valley bottoms. So even with this proposal, a lot of it is high elevation. We just can't get away from it without having just a finger strip type of park. So 2% of the timber harvesting land base within the proposal has been logged. Which one? So why did that? There's where it hit it. So 46% of this proposal is already designated caribou ungulate winter range. Again, whoop, let's go back. You can see with the designated caribou winter range how much of it is low elevation forest. It corresponds to the timber harvesting land base. All the white on this map is alpine rock and ice. So you can see that throughout this whole protected area, the majority of the caribou protection is high elevation. And it's because of the logging of these old growth forests that mountain caribou today are facing extinction. Our generation and the next are probably witnessing extinction of mountain caribou right now. And it's because of habitat loss, not predators. We're down to somewhere under 550 left on Earth for mountain caribou. And the key thing in all the government's PR, they claim that they protected 2.2 million hectares of habitat. Well, only 380,000 of that was new protection. All the other protection was already established under higher level plans by previous governments. This government came in, legislated it all, and said they protected 2.2 million hectares. Oh, what that? Most of you know the habits of mountain caribou. Usually in mid-January, when the snow is deep enough and consolidated enough, they'll head to the subalpine and alpine. Where the snow is consolidated, they can stand on top of it and feed on the hair lichens. They prefer the black bryoria, but they also target the alectora also. But increasingly, scientists are starting to come on side and say that mountain caribou are in trouble because the low elevation old growth forests have been destroyed by clear-cut logging. We have destroyed their habitat, and that is the main problem with them. Again, some facts on the mountain caribou thing. One of the key things is that if mountain caribou do not increase, or if they do fade out, this protection will be rescinded and it'll be logging as usual. So this area, the back end of it, is the jewel of our park proposal. This is the Inkamapoo River. It's sort of symbolic of many of our river valleys, that the best timber in them have been clear-cut logged long ago. This was logging from the 1980s and 1990s. 2/3 of the valley have been cleaned out by clear-cut logging. The valley was once a magnificent forest of ancient cedar trees. Now it's a sea of stumps, regenerated forests, and cottonwood stands. Now that these forests have been logged, no generation will see a forest of this stature on these log sites again. We just aren't here long enough. These trees are probably all in excess of 1,000 years old, and once they're gone forever. But fortunately, in the Inkamapoo, there's 15 kilometers of contiguous forest and wilderness remaining up to Glacier Park. But only 5 kilometers of it is old-growth cedar forest. The rest of it is dominated by steep mountain slopes and avalanche terrain and slide alder. When we first went in there in 2002, the logging company was already in marking cut blocks, road locations. This tree was right in the center of the main line road. Fortunately, at that time, we teamed up with a budding lichenologist from Montana that came knocking at our door looking for old growth rainforest. And we said, boy, have we got a forest for you. And in a very short time, he found a wide array of coastal rainforest lichens in this valley. Within several visits, he was finding significant species like this Loberia retigera, which is smoker's lung lichen, which rarely was found this far south in the interior, plus the species of concern, Nephroma occultum. And at that time, this was a very important species, and the finding of that convinced the Ministry of Forests to bring in their silvicultural specialist, Dr. Andre Arsenault, because the logging company wasn't going to stop their logging plans for a few rare lichens. But when Arsenault came in and in just half a day, he found enough lichens that confirmed Strabili stuff, we managed to convince the logging company for at least a short-term moratorium for Arsenault to do some thorough studies in the area. And Arsenault studies confirmed what Strabili already said. Unfortunately, his studies had some good stuff in them, but they were weak on protection. So the Ministry of Forests basically put about 50% of the area into an old growth management zone and allowed the logging company to log the other 50%. So the logging company was getting ready to move into one of the branch drainages, and several people, 3 to be exact, decided to go camping and pitch their tent in the middle of the road. Well, this caused the logging company to have to go to court to get an injunction. And when they finally got the injunction and brought down the court order, more came down than just the legal order. So the sufficient rock came down to damage the canyon bridge severely enough that it could not be repaired to carry loaded logging trucks. So that bought us quite a bit more time to complete biodiversity studies in the area. And Sprabili was already teamed up with BC lichenologists Trevor Goward and Curtis Bjork. And in 2007, they published a study that found 3 species of lichens new to BC from the Incompahglo, another 3 new to North America, and 7 species new to science, including this myocroidia, which so far is still exclusive to the Incompahglo. As well, they found quite a few unidentified lichens that are probably new to science, but it's very expensive to do all the documentation work worldwide to prove that they are new to science. So we probably have 20, 25 species on the burner that are potentially new to science from the Incompahglo. And some of these species that were first found new to science in the Incompahglo now have since been found in some other areas. But Sprabili's work attracted other people, and in 2004, mycologist Dr. Luna Seska and her husband Adolf Seska, the former chief of the BC Conservation Data Center, came up to join Sprabili and Bjork and us in the Incompahglo. And in less than half a day in the Incompahglo, we collected 121 species of lichens. 20 of them were found in clear cuts. The other 101 came out of the old growth forest. 40 of those species were associated with coastal rainforest. So again, not only lichens, but mushrooms are also pointing to that this is a very high biodiverse rainforest system. And in fact, the jewel of that day was this discovery of Phaeoclibia. Previous to this finding, it was never known in the interior of North America. It had only been known from very wet rainforests on the Olympic Peninsula, the Redwoods, and one place in BC at Carmana. So not only was this the first and only interior find, it was also the most northerly find. Another rare species is this Cortinarius, and its documentation is still being worked out, but it's basically a new species to science. They aren't quite sure what that's why the question marks, what species it's actually going to fall under yet. And not only were there small and pretty mushrooms, but the boletus grew to huge dimensions in this forest. And because we had an interdisciplinary team in there on the mushrooms, it wasn't only mushrooms we found. Victoria at that time was specializing in mosses, and she found a rainforest moss called Pucaria lucens, and it was one of the first finds in the interior. And if you're very lucky in these forests and you appear in some dark places, you may find the goblin's gold. This is quite an old family of mosses. Some of its spores have been found amongst our oldest fossils. This is usually found in very damp, dark soils, usually on root tip-ups and in areas close to streams and little brooks. So it has to be very mild. And if you get at the right angle to it, then it glows like this. Otherwise, it's kind of a dull green. And the mountain moonwort is red listed. Again, it's only known from about 5 places in BC, 1 in Glacier Park. And there's many habitats in the Incomplu. This is down in the canyon, and these aspleniums are kind of a rare find. We sent, there were 3 strains of aspleniums that we found, and we sent them to the UK for analysis, and one of them came back as the first interior find in inland North America. And one of the important habitats in the Incomplu is its wetland, especially in relation to the Columbia Basin, where it has lost something like 26% of its wetlands due to flooding. But this wetland has kind of fallen short of the sight of a lot of scientists because it's only about 2 square kilometers, and so it hasn't been observed. But when we were coming out from the mushroom foray, we jumped off the road into this, and within 30 feet of the road, we found 2 red listed species and a blue listed species. So this orchid, the Liparius, was very special to find, and then the Uticulera is actually a carnivorous plant. It has bladders that are submerged underwater that trap insects. And prior to finding it here, its only known other occurrence in BC was the Laird Hot Springs. So Sprabile's work has drawn international attention, and in 2011, a team of 4 snail scientists approached us and wanted to also survey in the Incomplu. And I have to say and thank all the scientists in this. All came voluntarily donating all their time, because there's no way that a small environmental group such as the Valhalla Society could afford the expertise that these people provided. So they came in, and not only did they sample in the Incomplu and the Selkirks Park proposal, but they kind of did a cursory view all around the central Kootenays. They came down the Arrow Lake system and sampled it in the cusp, down past Slocan on the Slocan River, over into the Lardo, over into the Duncan. But the richest site of all, again, was the wetland in the Incomplu. And this is a view of the debris tray that they sorted out. And this elongated turban-like snail is, not me, I forgot right now. We'll see it shortly, its name. But there were snails in here and mollusks and several other critters. So it's a vertigo, the turban-shaped one. And the vertical lake here was last found alive in Field, BC 100 years ago. It was believed to be extirpated from BC. But this group of scientists found it in large numbers in the Incomplu wetland, and they found it in other sites that they sampled. They sampled a total of 29 sites. 4 of those sites had this snail species to it. And what they feel is that it wasn't that the species was extirpated, it was that scientists weren't looking in the right habitats for it, that it's been here in BC all along, and people just didn't clue in as to where to look. And this is one of the things they found in their study. 1/5 of the snail species that they found were red or blue listed. And they just feel that it's only because the area wasn't thoroughly assessed that these things have been listed. Unfortunately, the stump fields and regenerated forest created by clear-cut logging do not host any of these species. So once you log these forests, we not only lose the big trees, we lose all the small species also that are associated under them. But these stumps and the windfalls have been used to try age what these trees are in the Incomplu. The Ministry of Forest maintains that the largest trees in there can only be a maximum of 800 years old. I didn't believe that, so I set about trying to document how old these trees could be. This is a 1.6 meter diameter windfall, and took a slab out of it, and in 70 centimeters of solid wood, it had 690 growth rings. And you'll see, if you want to look at the end of the night, there's a whole series of cross sections as a result of the work that I've done taking out of stumps and logs. But trees in the Incomplew drove up to 4 meters in diameter. So with the work that I've done, this suggests that these trees, a 4 meter tree, could easily be 1,800 to 2,000 years old. And since doing this work, we got onto some work that the U.S. Forest Service has done in northern Idaho, and their work confirms what we have found in the Incomplew. They're finding that the old growth trees in northern Idaho are up to 18 to 2,000 years for their larger trees. So this is a series of what some of these cross sections are. You can see with the tape, and so all these cross sections have basically come out of trees that are in around a meter, meter and a half diameter, and it's showing ages of 700, 600 years on it. From all the work that I've done in there, what we're finding is roughly, these trees are roughly 450 years per meter of diameter. So a 2 meter diameter tree is going to be around 900 years old. The river flowing through that old growth forest is incredibly beautiful. But even that far away, it wasn't free from independent power producer claims. And in 2012, TransAlta decided to exercise an exploration permit to come in and drill sites and build roads to see the feasibility for doing a private power project. Fortunately, for once, we were ahead of the 8 ball instead of behind it. We had 10 years of scientific studies and a stack of 6 inches high of documentation. So we shipped that to TransAlta as well as to the press. And within a month, TransAlta rescinded its exploration license and gave up its permit. 2 other licenses followed suit, but we had scientists writing letters, people throughout the area that knew of the Incomplew. The amount of correspondence that the government got on the subject was heartwarming and really encouraged us to continue with this work and keep up the fight to save the Incomplew. So today the Incomplew continues to run wild and free and is a major spawning area for the blue-listed bull trout. This cascade is just a short ways up the river from the Arrow Lakes. Once the bull trout are over this cascade, they're the only species that are able to clear it. They have the entire rest of the Incomplew all the way up to Battlebrook to themselves. So they can spawn, lay their eggs. No other predator fish can make it in there to interfere with their rearing. The Incomplew is responsible for about 25% of the Arrow Lake Dolly Varden sport fishery. So the bull trout, the Gerard rainbow, and the kokanee all need well-aerated, running cold water for spawning. This park proposal captures several rivers. We've been looking at the Incomplew. This is the Battlebrook. We have the Duncan on the east side of the proposal, East Creek, the Westfall River that flows into the Duncan, Healy Creek, and Lake Creek on the south. So we capture quite a few rivers that are very important for both the Arrow Lake and Kootenai Lakes fisheries. This is East Creek and its northern neighbors, Gagridge Creek, to this day are both unroaded. They have been in several logging companies' license areas, but they've always been too expensive to get the roads through the initial canyon. So they still have good untouched pockets of rainforest timber. They would make an important connectivity from Bugaboo Park through the Duncan to Glacier Park and across the Duncan Lardo to Goat Range Park. They all have characteristics of very wet rainforest. This is Gary Deers from the Purcell Alliance for Wilderness. He has played a very significant role in helping us develop this park proposal. He's done a lot of the exploration in the more remote forests of this proposal. We also want to thank the Wilderness Committee, who initially spearheaded some of the initial forays into these forests and some of the initial GIS mapping. And more lately, Rael Marquardt, a documentary filmmaker who has done a short documentary on the Inkalmaplu, which if you Google the Inkalmaplu, you can find this film on the website and view it. This is some of the remnant forest at the head end of Duncan Lake, standing testament to the forests that were cut down and burned by the flooding of the Duncan Dam. So this area had important old growth cedar hemlock, but again, another valley that we lost a significant amount of old growth to. This is looking down the West Fall River. It's partially logged, but this picture is largely the way it stands now. The Forest Service pulling the logging road out of it, an important bull trout stream, and still has lots of forested habitat for mountain caribou and other large ungulate species. The Lardo River is a very important connectivity to the Goat Range Park, and its bountiful kokanee runs are an important fall feeding ground for sow grizzlies and their cubs before hibernation. So the kokanee and the bald eagle and grizzly bear all have a relationship with the kokanee that deliver lots of nutrient to the surrounding forest. These cycles have gone on for thousands of years, and the habitat that has allowed these systems to continue has to be protected. It's low elevation habitat. We have to, if we want to keep seeing these critters on the land, we have to give them some protection. Park proposal also has vast areas of untracked wilderness, and it has to stay that way if we want to keep mountain caribou and grizzly bear on the landscape. But some of the old logging roads and mining access roads do provide good access to stunning alpine scenery and some good open land hiking. Mount Templeton in the Badshot Range is a limestone fault that runs down through part of the Purcells. This is the top of the Duncan, looking west into Butters Creek. The triple top peak in the center of the picture. From the right is Glacier Park, from the left is part of our park proposal. These are some of the trees in Lake Creek, another important old growth area that hasn't been logged so far. Whether our old growth is very wet or dry old growth, it's all high carbon storing forests. They're all important for carbon storage, and so our old growth forests, scientists are saying our old growth forests are some of our best carbon storage that we have on the planet, and that we have to maintain these forests if we want to give our future generations any hope against climate change. Many people say that old growth forests don't store carbon very well, but the science has found there's some of the best carbon stored, and that they take the carbon and direct it into the soil. So when these forests are cut down, not only is the carbon lost in their structure, but the disturbed soils will also continue to bleed carbon off into our atmospheres. But there's something more we'd like to leave future generations. We feel the harmony and interconnectedness of an old growth forest is an essential human experience, the majesty and serenity of which can be found nowhere else. Thank you. So if you have any questions.
First off, I want to congratulate you on all your hard work, and your presentation, which was extremely cogent, lucid, and informative. I feel you've actually not left many questions to ask, but I do have two if you don't indulge me. My first one would be, as someone who's clearly very educated in the field, not necessarily what did you learn on a scientific level, because you've made that very clear, Nick, but what on a personal level have you learned throughout your journey? And the second one would be to the average person who may not be informed about these kinds of issues. You know, we're very privileged to find ourselves in a room with passionate, dedicated people in it. What stake do you feel they hold in your struggle, and what would you say to them to get them on board to sign your petition?
Complicated questions.
Well, the first one's just personal. You know,
Yeah.
why are you doing this on a personal level? You know, people often forget that scholars, you know, are real people and write scholarly things for real reasons.
Well, many years ago when I was a young fella, I used to work with an old trapper. And as we went into the bush and into different cabins, he always used to say, well, these cabins are left open for your use. All that is required is for you to leave it just a little bit better than you found it. And this is what I look at with this world that I'm living in. And in the span of life that I've lived, I'm often looking and think, well, maybe in terms of wilderness, I may have seen the best of it. And unfortunately, I feel that I may have failed in trying to leave it a little better for younger generations. But I'm not going to give up trying, and that's why I'm still here, gray-haired, doing this.
How far have you gone in terms of talking with the provincial and federal governments about this proposal?
Federally, we found out that the feds can't do anything without provincial permission. So therefore, we've concentrated on provincial government. We've met with the NDP caucus. They seem largely in support. We've sat down with Terry Lake in the legislature when he was Minister of Environment. We had 15 minutes with him that grew to 3/4 of an hour despite his assistant tapping on the watch saying time's up. So we felt we had a good hearing with Terry, but their government philosophy is anti-park. And witness of that was Bill, I think it was C4 last spring, where they opened up our parks to industrial feasibility studies. So with this current government, it's very difficult to talk protection.
What kind of public relations campaign are you running now, aside from showing this to small groups?
Basically showing this website campaigns and being involved wherever we can. We're going to try to get some additional video documentary footage in the Incoma Blue, but access is making that a problem. But we just keep hammering away at the edges in terms of keep getting publicity out there.
How is access a problem in the Incoma Blue? I mean, you just drive right in there.
Used to be able to, but the Incommaplu is a pretty wild valley, and
Oh, I know, I've been there a
couple
number of
years ago, the Kelly Creek Bridge partially washed out, and that gave the logging company a good excuse to go in and pull it out. We had sort of repaired it to the point that you could get a quad across, but we were just going in to spike it all together when they were moving in with equipment to pull it out. So it's a harder access now. I know of some people that have got quads to the end of the road, but they have to ford the creek. So it's, for young people, it's 11K hike or bike ride in still, but the road is brushing in quickly.
To some extent, you're preaching to the converted, and so you've gone to the NDP and they are supportive, but they're in opposition. The current government and the neoliberal concept is it's not economically advantageous and it's not interesting. So from a very practical point of view, is there another way that this could be spun, that not just to people who are interested in it from ecological, emotional, scientific point of view, but also from an economic point of view? How would it be in the interest of a neoliberal government to create this park?
That we haven't dealt with, and I don't know if we can spin it that way.
Because I think if you can't spin it that way, it's not going to fly until we change government, which we may have some beginning in October, we'll see, but there was a wind of change in Alberta last elections.
And we're expecting a change. The last election, we're quite disappointed. But unfortunately, short of development inside this proposal, that's the only way that we can see that you spin it economically. And with the kind of species that are in there, you don't want development in these areas. Some of these areas need to be protected for what they are.
Just curious, with your park proposal, or have you got a idea of what, there's all kinds of different levels of park and different levels of use, land use to go with different, national park versus provincial, that kind of thing, or what, I mean, to go to national park level, that's the goal, I guess, but, to settle for bronze of something where, okay, no logging or whatever, but, to completely close off roads and stuff like that, I'm just curious where you're kind of headed with that. Any ideas, or you'll take what you can get, or what?
No, we're after full protection, because so much of the area is mountain caribou habitat. What we see with mountain caribou, we've blown 10 crucial years in their protection. Their numbers are crashing. We're at a point that if we want to see mountain caribou on the habitat, we've got to keep human development out of mountain caribou area, period. So that means pulling roads out. And in fact, in the Westfall last year, the Ministry of Forest already started pulling roads out because they didn't want the liability issues with landslides. And I understand they're supposed to be starting at the head end of the Upper Duncan. And a lot of these roads are basically just erosion channels now anyway, so it's the best thing you can do is get rid of them and just turn some of that landscape just back to some natural standards. And what we're saying is that here's a tract that it has shown, especially in the Duncan, that it hasn't been economically viable since the time of some negative stumpage back in the 70s, where they virtually absorbed all the logging companies' costs and then allowed them to log the best timber for nothing. And that's the reason they got 120K back into the back end of the Duncan. So now most logging companies with even minimal stumpage can't afford to go in and log in that country. So they're pulling it out.
BC government is making fewer and fewer land use decisions without the buy-in and support of First Nations. So you have quite a large footprint for this park, overlaps a number of First Nations claims. I haven't heard their role talked about. I'm just wondering your interaction with First Nation claims on this area?
That's our next step, is to start dealing with them. We have worked with First Nations in the Chilcotin up in the Quesnel Lake area. And largely in this area, the First Nations have been quite quiet. It's only been in the last few years that they've started to talk about it. So that's where our next direction is going. We'll be meeting with First Nations and presenting the proposal to them.
Yeah, the reason I say is, I mean, BC Parks just gave the first park back to First Nations, and this is just a few months ago, and this is the first of what looks to be a number of parks going back, being given away from government to First Nations for control.
Wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, well, BC Parks has actually signed an agreement as part of the Truth and Reconciliation Agreements to transfer 50% of the economic opportunities within a park to First Nations. So right now, the activity's focused on the coast, but is moving inland. So my recommendation, I do obviously a fair bit of work in this domain, would be to engage sooner than later with the First Nations sectors, because certainly government's not going to make any decision without their support.
Right?
Do you know how many cat skiing or heli ski operations have overlapping tenures over?
Yeah, there's quite a few heli ski tenures in those areas already. Canadian Mountain Holidays, Selkirk Tangiers, that's a couple anyway. Cat skiing, I don't believe there's any. There's some backcountry huts on the outskirts. There's one proposal maybe for in the core area. But there is considerable heli skiing in the area.
I just wondered, back on the scientific page, with so much burgeoning knowledge and so many rare lichens, and there's probably a lot more in there, obviously. What about, and this might be a dangerous area to open up, but what about the medicinal properties that might be potentially there?
That's a whole nother aspect, like just scratching the surface now, knowing, then that would be the thing, is to get medicinal experts in there that really know the herbs and things there.
Like, you don't want either, you don't want the big biotech or pharma companies coming in there.
Yeah, it's not looking at it for development, it's more just to identify what could be there and to know the things, if there's rare plants that are important for that type of thing.
Right.
Yes, Tom?
Looking at the map of the area on the handout that was on the back table here and your presentation, I came across a map, I somehow missed an announcement about this meeting, and somebody brought it to my attention, and I found a notice on, there's a stoke list, and there's a map attached to it that shows a considerable more ground covered by the park proposal that, would kind of interfere with a lot more industry and recreation stuff.
Haven't seen that.
Which is a proper map.
Well, the maps that we're showing are the proper maps, they're all on our website. And so it's, the map on the handout is basically the map on the other, yeah.
Got a question, Craig. Do you think it would be easier to protect this area if BC had its own standalone legislation for endangered species?
Well, it all goes back to the governments. And right now, it doesn't seem to matter what legislation we have, it's what the government's inclination is to enforce it. So in terms of this government and the Species of Risk Act, whether they'd enforce it or not. And why I say that is when we look at the mountain caribou habitat protection, we just have to look at what they leave open for in a lot of the snowmobile area agreements, that some of the best former caribou habitat has been given as play areas, the snowmobiling, and the steeper habitat has been given to the caribou as reserve area. And some prime examples of this are in the North Thompson on Groundhog Ridge and the Marmot Meadows area and Finn Creek, and Foam Creek.
This is really a political issue for the government. Do you have a letter writing campaign going or anything like that?
We encourage people to write letters. We don't have a campaign as such. One of the reasons why, being a charitable, we are limited by the federal government to 10% of our activities being political.
Hmm.
So
if you-
in our show and everything, we can't say that. If I say it verbally, hopefully you aren't going to go run till.
What you need is every,
But part of it, that's the reason our petition campaign is petitioning the government, and we would hope that that people take that a step farther and write letters.
what you need is every school kid in BC to send a letter to the premier.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, but on the wolf call, is it Pacific Wild? Had Ian McAllister's group, Pacific Wild got 175.
There's about 180,000 signatures right now.
180,000 signatures, and the government says that it doesn't pay attention to petitions.
90% of British Columbians are against the grizzly hunt, and it's just expanded
Yeah.
its season. right?
Petitions work if they're, and letters work if they're all handwritten and hand-signed. If they're internet petitions, they'll blow it off.
There are different types of petitions,
Yeah.
right? Or you want-
It's a personal touch that politicians are interested in. That's what they pay attention to because they can say, that's a real person.
Yeah.
Whereas an internet petition, it could be anybody.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons we haven't launched an internet petition and are still have paper petitions here on the two tables.
Okay.
Yes?
Would there be opportunity to partner with organizations like CPAWS that have similar mandates and goals, that have more resources and campaign clout?
At times it can be, but we're at loggerheads with CPAWS for their position on the Mountain Caribou Board. And so we do not work with organizations that are selling out our caribou.
Any interaction with the Mountain Caribou Progress Board?
Well, that's, I just answered that with CPAWS. Yeah, our interaction is they're greenwashing government policy and the extinction of wolves.
You mentioned Wilderness Committee though, are you still working with them on this?
A bit, they're on other issues, so we're kind of, they support, they're a sign-on and support us on this, but in terms of closely working with them, no, we aren't at this time.
But maybe.
Yeah, we keep each other abreast of where
Right,
we're going
if there
and
were
what's
change
happening.
of government
Yeah.
and things began to roll, they might be very helpful.
Yeah, we have the Inland Rainforest map, and overall, that's a co-sponsored.
I've seen it on their calendar.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
co-sponsored thing between us and the Wilderness Committee. Tom?
Subject came up, and there are a lot of details, far too many to go into here. Yes, I agree with you that the caribou problem is habitat, and that started probably 150 years ago. It was developed. And, seems one of the big problems is when the habitat changed, it was better for pastures in some seasons. And predator control seems to be necessary in a couple of spots, but what I was going to ask, what's the predator situation within this proposed park? Is there a problem in there?
Because there's, especially in the Duncan, has been heavily clear cut. We've got lots of early sorrel and we've got lots of moose. And so when you have moose, you have wolves. And this is why we're saying we have to stop human activity in caribou habitat. Shooting the wolves isn't going to do any, all shooting the wolves is going to do is increase the wolves, or increase the moose. Increase the moose, either if the wolves don't increase, then the cougars are going to increase. Then we're going to be shooting cougars. The fact that we have to kill another animal to keep caribou on speaks to the fact of how badly we've done in our environment. How badly logged it is, how bad, we're on a tipping point. And basically what's happened, you don't see it quite as much in the Revelstoke area because of the extent of old growth that you have. But further south in the Kootenays, where there are smaller pockets of old growth, we're on the tipping point of changing our whole forest ecosystem from an old growth dominated forest system to a young growth, early seral system. And when you change that ecology, you've also changed the animals on it. And unfortunately, the caribou are crashing, and it's because of predators. But does that justify going in and trying to shoot 100, 500, maybe like they did in Alberta, 1,000 wolves?
They pop right back.
And they come back. So it's a sign that the issue, there's far more damage been done to our ecosystem. And so that what the government is doing is putting a sham over on the public, saying that we can have caribou and industrial development too. All we have to do is kill the wolves. Well, sorry, we've got scientists now. There's a paper just been released in April called Witnessing Extinction, done by a couple scientists out of UNBC as well as government caribou biologists. And they're saying that predator culling will not work unless we do substantial habitat protection now. And that's the crux of the issue, is that we have failed to set aside enough of the right habitat for the mountain caribou.